Okay, we're going to get started in about a minute. Go. Awesome. Good to see everyone. Okay, for the sake of time, we're going to get started right away, right at 5 o'clock. So thanks for joining us today. This one is essentially an application CEU, if you will. So most of our CEUs up to this point, whenever we're talking about the year-long series, have also been application-based for ourselves. But this one is also how we can truly introduce some of these practices and principles as part of trauma-informed practices. And I think that that's something that most of us within this community are striving to do, which is really making sure that what we're doing is being helpful rather than potentially causing any sort of harm. I think that's one of our shared inner values, if you will. So that's our goal today. Before we get started, I'm going to invite everybody just to stop and notice for just a second. Reground yourself, put both feet on the floor, grab a sip of something if you need it. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes. Help yourself let go of everything that you just did today. We've all worked full schedules today. I don't know about y'all, but my day started pretty early and there were a lot of breaks. And usually I'm a little bit better about scheduling breaks for myself. Today was not one of those days. So I'm going to invite you to take a break right now. Awesome. I'm also going to forewarn everyone, there's a high probability that my daughter will come running in at some point. Sorry, I'm also a mom, so I'm not sorry. She's at a neighbor's house, but the back door is also open, so she just likes to hop fences. And that's what she's doing right now. But just to forewarn everyone, that might be happening. Okay, well, thanks for joining today. Thanks for pausing your day for a moment so that we can engage in the shared value of learning together. I appreciate it. So our learning objectives today are, we're going to be going through the difference between what's trauma-informed versus treatment, right? We're not treating trauma. When we talk about ACT and the application of acceptance and commitment therapy, at no point do I ever want you to believe or take away from these CEUs that you are now ready to talk about, discuss, go through any sort of trauma therapy or healing with any of your learners or families. Please understand that. That should be done with a licensed professional. There are tons of great resources out there. If this is something that you are in need of personally, highly recommend things like EMDR or anything that might really kind of help you in your trauma healing. But again, you're not then going to be in that mindset of being able to treat these types of areas. So when we talk about trauma, we really want to talk about that from a perspective of how are we here to support and how are we teaching how to support how we are teaching others how to support themselves. So that's really what we're talking about here today. And we're going to be going through the research from Dr. Camille Kolu, where again, we've talked about her before. Well, we're going to address ACT as a buffer, if you will. And then how we can establish a routine that's sound within those buffers. So essentially, what we're doing is taking this really great behavior analytic lens that we've been given and be able to help people establish these routines. And I think a lot of us who have gone through some sort of therapy in the past have thought, like, that's really great advice. Now, how do I do this? And that's kind of where we can come in, which is I'm not telling you what to do, right? That's between you and your therapist, but making sure that your schedule supports that is something that I can help you with, right? Making sure that we're going to get more into this, but making sure that we're taking care of those 6 buffers is something that we can help with and have our behavior technicians help with too. That's also something that we can do for ourselves. So again, like every other step in this series, we are going to be applying these principles to ourselves, right? Nothing that we tell somebody else to do is not something that we would be able to do ourselves. And that's so hard as behavior analysts. I think that we've all kind of struggled with that ourselves, which is that I don't want to do that work myself. I would much rather have somebody else that I'm focusing on, right? But unfortunately, that's just not really the way ACT works, if you will. Okay. So any questions about our learning objectives so far? Awesome. Thanks, Bree. I appreciate it. Okay. So what's the difference? What is the difference between trauma-informed versus treatment? We're not treating the trauma, right? Just like we talked about before. It's not our responsibility to discuss past events. And this can get tricky too whenever we're talking about the assessment process. So it's also important to recognize that sometimes parents and caregivers and even learners might share with us some things that we don't need to be addressing. We can hold a space for that if we truly need to. Other than that, we can redirect it back to what we're doing, right? Back to that present moment, which is also important to recognize that we need to establish boundaries, right? As part of this trauma-informed approach. It would be really unsafe of us as adults to take on all of this information and either A, do nothing with it, or B, do something with it that could potentially cause harm because it's outside of our scope of practice. So that's why when we're talking about these past events that might come up, we don't necessarily need to know everything. We can take a trauma assumed approach, right? And just assume that there is trauma. And so because of that, we're still going to address these 6 buffers. Or we're going to talk about how maybe it might be our recommendation that you do speak to somebody where this is in their scope of practice, and we can coordinate care so that we can really make sure that what we're going to be doing is best for you and the learner. Cool. So that's that tricky spot, right? I think, and I'd like to believe that most practitioners now take this trauma-informed or trauma-assumed approach without causing harm. But I've always heard stories, and I think we all have, where you can say, like, ooh, it seems like maybe they asked kind of some leading questions that maybe we didn't need to necessarily know for behavior analytic treatment. But there are going to be some things that are going to be appropriate for us to know. If we're going to do toilet training with a learner, we need to know if there's a history of sexual abuse because that impacts how we need to treat that, right? We're again not treating the trauma that's from the sexual abuse, but we are going to approach toilet training differently. We are going to ensure that maybe we do things where they're a little bit more with the caregiver as opposed to with us doing the direct implementation. That's okay. That's an accommodation that we should be able to make as being trauma informed. But we don't need to know the ins and outs of everything that happened there. That's where we start getting out of our scope of practice. Does that make sense? We don't need to know sometimes the information that our minds tell us that we want to know, because sometimes that's just our curiosity getting the best of us, right? As opposed to essentially recognizing, ooh, that's something I need to know. Now I'm going to use that information as a way that's going to benefit this learner and this family in a positive and supportive way, right? Versus, oh my gosh, tell me more. And then suddenly every ABA session is spent talking about and recalling these events, right? That's causing harm, and that's not our scope. Okay, awesome. Bree, I love that feedback and I need it. So I'm glad that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so this is one of my biggest soapboxes, if you will. Safety is trauma informed. When we hold boundaries and the boundary of like, ooh, I don't need to know that much information, right? That's TMI for what we need for ABA. That's a boundary, and there's safety in that. And I want y'all to think about that for just a second and how maybe sometimes we forget about boundaries also are parallel with safety. And we can essentially think about the fact that people without boundaries who are always present and available on the weekends, after hours, and things like that could potentially then open themselves up to harm, right? And while consciously we don't often think about that, we think, no, I'm available here. My families need me. It's where the self-reflection piece comes into play. Why do we think, and are we telling ourselves, and are we allowing our brain, right, this kind of act perspective, to tell us this? Is it helpful? We aren't emergency responders. Typically speaking, as ABA practitioners, BCBAs, RBTs, we aren't responding on a Saturday afternoon to an emergency situation with one of our learners. So we have to think about where these boundaries lie and how we're going to set them. One of the ways that we like to set boundaries is right away. 8 to 6 are our hours of operation, Monday through Friday. We won't respond to messages outside of that. And the reason for that is that we have boundaries. When we don't have boundaries, we open ourselves up for this type of dual relationship that can occur. That's just general ethics, right? But then we also look at this from a trauma-informed perspective as well, right? Which is when we kind of stray from this routine of 8 to 6, and these are my working hours, and then after that is my leisure time, my values-based time, my time to spend with my family, my time to rest. When we allow ourselves to pull away from that type of routine, we start to engage in reactivity strategies. And we also start reinforcing reactivity as a behavior for our families and caregivers. And that can be really difficult for us to think about. But the reality is that that's pulling away from any sort of committed action or values-based behavior that is strategic, planned, and able to be modified when necessary. Because the reality is that sometimes some things are going to come up and you're going to be like, this is an IEP meeting, so this isn't my typical time that I would usually see this person, but I am going to schedule this time and I'm going to veer from my routine because this is still supported elsewhere, right? My routine elsewhere is still supporting it, rather than just constantly reacting to the stimuli that are in our environment. That type of reactivity is a trauma response, right? This is something that we as behavior analysts struggle with quite a bit. When a learner goes into crisis, we immediately go into reactivity. We very rarely slow down and regulate our behavior and consequently modeling those behaviors for the environment, right? But this is where ACT comes into play. Because what we're needing to teach in these moments, instead of reactivity, whenever we're holding firm to these boundaries and we're sticking to this routine, is how to regulate whenever these unwanted and aversive stimuli pop up, as they're going to, these challenges that we don't want, right? So we have to be able to model these skills for our learners as well as for ourselves and for our supervisees, right? So for co-regulation, you got to start with yourself, right? What works for you? And I'm pausing for a second because I want you to truly think like, what does work for you? When you are overwhelmed and overstimulated, what's that one thing that you can go for and do for yourself that's going to help you? I'm going to be real. This is one of those ones that I think a lot of us struggle with. A lot of us in the 80s and 90s were not necessarily taught a lot of regulation strategies. It was a lot of time on your own to figure things out, right? Time out. There's not a lot of co-regulation and extinction, right? That's a behavior analytics strategy that we all go to. But what are we doing? Are we helping? Again, from this ACT lens, are we helping? Is what we're doing truly trauma informed and values based? If we're essentially disassociating from the moment to hold this firm boundary. How can we hold a boundary instead while modeling co-regulation strategies? Oh man, took a deep breath right away. I added a little statement of empathy right away, even if it's to myself. Man, that sucks. How often do we say that to ourselves? Like, son of a nutcracker, right? That's diffusion. So every time that we're taking those moments to pause between the stimulus and the response, right? That's what we're going for. But that pause in between, there's a behavior that we engage in. Sometimes it's a combination of behaviors or a chain of behaviors. That's great. Those are usually diffusion strategies. Okay, so think about what are those right away? Mine is I sigh. I sigh right away. Cool. Some people might be like, oh my gosh, you're wearing your emotions on your sleeve. So what? We are so used to hiding our emotions that we've forgotten that we actually have to display some emotions with learners to get some co-regulation to happen. The kid's frustrated. We don't have to meet frustration with frustration, but we can meet that frustration with how we would diffuse from frustration. Son of a nutcracker. Well, gosh, this stinks. This is so frustrating, isn't it? All right, well, let's solve this problem, right? So we can model these things, and then we can move straight into another modeling procedure of how are we going to solve this problem? And that leads us straight into what choices can we make that are in line with your values and in line with my value of safety? And that's usually what I'll prompt for some of our older learners. I'll say, okay, well, let's solve this problem. How can we do it to where we're safe? Because you know that's what I want. But then I also know that you want your free time because that's what you value. You get to do things on your own. So how are we going to solve this problem to where you're both safe and able to do this on your own? So we're going to make a choice. And from an ACT lens, we can make the visual of choice point. I carry scratch paper around with me everywhere. Do you know why? Because I like to write down the problems. I'll say, this is my problem. This is my problem, Bob. Now I've got to make a choice. And this choice can be I can stay pissed. I can stay hooked. I can dig my heels in and kind of wallow in this problem. And that's what we do sometimes. We do that sometimes with extinction procedures because it's not trauma informed and it doesn't provide this type of co regulation skill based strategy. We're not teaching a skill, right? But if we go through these types of steps, we're teaching something, right? We're teaching rule governed behavior by honoring those boundaries, right? We're teaching self management by following routines. We're modeling and teaching regulation strategies, coping skills. Y'all, that's a buffer. And we're about to talk about it in just a second. But those skills right there, those coping skills, those co-regulation strategies, the diffusion skills, that is 100% what we need whenever we're faced with the stuff that we don't want to be faced with, whenever the challenges hit us. So what are we going to go to? Sometimes it's going to be more than just like, ah, shucks, golly gee. Sometimes it is going to be bigger than that. Sometimes it is going to take longer than that. Sometimes it is going to be going through, okay, well, I've gone through essentially the entire hexaflex in my mind, and I'm going to have to go through it again before I feel better, before this learner has worked their way through it. That's okay. You're still modeling, you're still teaching, and most importantly, you are regulating your own behavior. You are practicing these coping skills yourself rather than disassociating and engaging in extinction practices or whatever else it might be. But that's typically what happens when we're holding a boundary, right? First this, then that. The SD voice comes out. We repeat it every few minutes. We start physically blocking. Our weird safety care stances come out. You don't have to do all of that. Sometimes you just have to be like, all right, man, well, we're going to stick to our routine. Oh, clearly I can see that you don't want to stick to your routine. All right, how am I going to diffuse from this thing that I don't want to be faced with right now? Man, I don't want to go through challenging behavior. I don't want to go through the response protocol. I don't want to use my brain right now. I just wanted to follow my checklist, do all of my skills-based acquisition programming, write a beautiful little session note, and say 0 rates of maladaptive behaviors. That's what we all want, right? But that doesn't always happen. And so what happens is that challenging behavior does happen, and suddenly we're met with having to regulate our own behavior. And it's very easy for us to instead just hold the boundary. It is easier, right? We'll walk away from it feeling weirdly numb and not necessarily good, right? But, you know, we can go through some problem solving skills. We can model what to do instead. And then we can do sometimes what we have to do, which is just staying present and in the moment, taking deep breaths, going through our own 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When we look at this from, like many of us have done like PCM and safety care, there's that wait strategy, right? So you're in wait. What are you going to do? Are you literally just going to wait? No, because you're going to get dysregulated. So you're going to regulate yourself in that moment. I'm swaying right now because that's immediately how I, when I'm standing, regulate myself. I will often hold my heart, right? It's just something that I do. It's regulating to me. Mindfulness, these coping skills, these mindfulness skills are trauma informed. We're going to talk about that with the research here in just a second. So I've actually heard this said several times from many different people. So I don't know who said this first. But as many of you know, I attended Camp Mystic for 13 years. Um, this week has been pretty heavy. The moms, my friends, my previous campers, my co-counselors are sharing stories of their daughters, right? It's pretty big. Hoping to change state legislature. Um, it's crazy to me because that was like the safest place in the entire world to me. And I remember when we would do counselor orientation, this was before the campers would get there, we would go through safety drills. Never did we think that water would come that high, in all honesty. 13 years, never, right? But we would still do safety drills. But one of the last things that Dick Eastland would talk to us about would be driving on the highways. It's the back roads of Texas. There are a lot of deer and other animals. And he would tell us the safest choice is to hit the deer straight on, to hit that raccoon, to hit that armadillo, whatever it might be, straight on. Don't swerve. You're going to cause greater harm. You're going to get in a bigger accident. And it's the truth. 9 times out of 10 that I've ever known of anybody who's gotten in an accident with an animal, if they've swerved at all, they were lucky to walk out, if they did walk out, right? So this is sometimes something that comes up with our learners and us. We have really hard choices to make all the time. We get hit in the face with adverse events and stimuli that we don't want all the time. And our instinct is to avoid it. That's why extinction is one of those procedures that we go to first. We don't actually have to address the problem. We can avoid it. We don't have to do all of this hard stuff that's based in our values, right? We can avoid it. And we tend to do that quite often. And so this is a good act metaphor, in my personal opinion, in my clinical opinion. Don't swerve. Sometimes you got to hit these challenges square on, right? That's part of being trauma informed, right? If we are avoiding the boundary because we're afraid of the reaction from the learner, we are causing harm. But if we're also avoiding teaching the skill because we don't know what else to do, we're causing harm. So we just went through what else we could do, right? So when I look at these slides, which now I can't get to for some reason, and I'm worried that I'm gonna, oh, that's fine. Well, we're gonna get to it again. So we're gonna talk about these straight on. We're not going to avoid these boundaries. We're not going to avoid this routine. We're not going to avoid making a choice. We're going to do these things. And we're going to model that sometimes making the safe choice is hard, but we can take deep breaths together. We can make up a silly song together. We can have a little saying to ourselves together. I can model these things for you, right? As a safe adult who's holding this boundary that also feels uncomfortable for me to hold, right? We can share that empathy. Okay, I know. Act. Okay. So Dr. Kolu is up here in Denver. Yes, doing great on time. So proud of myself. She is up here in the Denver area and fantastic. She's been doing trauma work well before anybody else in our field. And she's fantastic. I highly encourage you, if this is the first time that you've heard me say something about it, or the first time that you've heard somebody else say something about it, highly encourage you to check it out. So her website right here, if you go to cuspemergence.com, go to it. You can click on it right now. I don't care. You're good. Because you're just going to find these things right here. If you go to the resources section, it's fantastic, y'all. She's got tangible, permanent product, records for us, assessments for you. Like, it's amazing. So, these are the problems that come up that we often avoid when it comes to supporting caregivers, as well as supporting ourselves, as well as supporting our learners. We often like to a blanket approach, do very simplistic ABA strategies for some pretty intense behaviors, right? So, this IPASS assessment is an inventory of potential aversive stimuli and setting events. It's wordy. That's why we call it the IPASS. But I want y'all to pull it up or look at it and look at some of the check marks, some of the questions, some of the prompts that are in there. We've got things like loud noises, crashing, a cough, talking, bright lights. And then odors. Oh man, I didn't even think about that, right? We often tell our like staff don't wear perfume, but what about some of these odors? The smell of vomit sometimes, oh my gosh, I know that I'm not the only one. The smell of fresh poop that I can tell is not in the toilet. We know there's a distinct difference in odor. That one sets me off every time, right? We all have these little triggers. So this is a fun one. I say fun, in that kind of haha, we're weird behavior analyst nerds kind of way. So this is a fun assessment to do with yourself to determine what your own possible aversive stimuli and setting events might be. And then I know one of our favorite things to do is to tell our caregivers, this is what you're supposed to do. You need to start a manding procedure with your own kid and only say and provide the item based on if he says a 3+ word mand. Well, you lost them at manding procedure and you kept on talking. So what I would say is the family member that you're trying to teach this procedure to in what we would kindly refer to happy, relaxed, and engaged. If you're saying this to them on your way out the door as their kid has been tantruming for the past 2 hours, I just don't know if that's the time and place to say it. Instead, what you might want to do is say, hey, today was kind of hard. Next time that I'm here, I'd like to go through some, like a questionnaire with you, because I think that maybe we can figure some stuff out together. So go through this questionnaire with them. Go through it with yourself first. If you're not able to answer it yourself, man, you're going to have some problems, right? You're not going to be able to do this with somebody else. It's going to feel too uncomfortable to do. So go through it yourself first. Practice what this looks like. Practice what these questions might sound like. And then go through it with the caregiver. Figure out the caregiver's potential aversive stimuli and setting events. Why? Because we need to know if they're going to be reactive or responsive, right? So when we were talking a few slides back and we were like, oh man, if we don't have a routine in place or something in place, we're going to be constantly reacting to the stimuli around us. Well, let's say that the stimuli around you are loud noises because you've got kids screaming who are constantly listening to K-pop Demon Hunters. That could be very aversive to you right now as a caregiver. So just like the sound of that might set a caregiver over the edge. But you wouldn't know that because you didn't assess to see if the same song over and over again was aversive to them. But you would know that if you had done the auditory stimuli, things that we hear, right? Okay, cool. We're going to move into some more of Dr. Kolu's work, but I love the IPASS. I cannot emphasize this enough. And again, when we're talking about this from an ACT perspective, it's all going to make sense as to why we need to know some of this stuff, right? This is trauma informed. This is information that we need to know without going into their past. Do you see the difference, right? This is where we can support. We don't need to know what happened throughout the sexual abuse. We need to know now, how does this behavior, how does this trauma show up now for this kid? And this is how we determine it. Or how does this trauma show up for this caregiver? Because let's get real, y'all. These caregivers are in active trauma all the time, right? So how does it show up for them? Currently, this is how we determine that from a behavior analytic lens. Right, Bree? It's really, really cool. And again, this way we're not digging into something that's outside of our scope, right? But we're providing support from a behavior analytic lens that's current, right? And in this current context and setting for the caregivers as well as for us. I also think this is great to do with behavior technicians as part of a self-assessment process. So that again, like if they're at the center with you or you're at a home and any of these events go off, they might be like, oh my gosh, it's because of this. This is why I froze and I couldn't engage in co-regulation strategies because this aversive stimuli was happening and it was legitimately setting me on fire, right? That's a trauma response. It makes sense. Okay, so this is a great tool. This is still Dr. Kolo's research, y'all. But this also comes from Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who is the former Surgeon General of California. She's still heavy in the trauma world, and she's still doing a ton about the ACEs. And she's still very much a proponent of these 6 buffers. So when we look at these buffers, we can see that we've already been working on mindfulness strategies when we're teaching those co-regulation strategies, right? Those diffusion strategies. We also already look at some of these things from a setting event perspective, right? Just like what Dr. Kolu's IPASS inventory was doing, right? Assessing those setting events. Well, if you look here, sleep and nutrition, right? Those are typically things that we look at for setting events. We don't often look at physical activity or relationships. And what I alluded to earlier, which is access to mental health. Like, hey, are you seeing a family therapist? Or the fact that our caregivers are in active trauma. Do you have somebody that you're working with right now? And I always like to reach out to the community of like your local community of who knows of people that are great in that area so that you have just a list of people that you can give. It's not like this is the person that I recommend, but I recognize that you don't want to Google this. So here is a list of 5 people that are in your area. I've never worked with them, or maybe you have, I don't know, but don't sell somebody, right? That's not our job. But maybe they just need to be led to the water, essentially, right? So, as behavior analysts, this is all within our scope. And here's how we develop a schedule and a routine that is rooted in how we can do this. How do we do this ourselves? Well, I like to set up myself for little successes. My mornings, I typically start the same. Here is why. If I start my morning any way different, I can't modify it, and then I'm reactive to it when something changes. And inevitably, as behavior analysts, we know this because clients cancel, behavior technicians call out, we're on call. Our day goes from what we thought was going to be a beautiful open schedule to back to back to back. That happens. But when we react to it, we start to engage in dysregulating behaviors. We are no longer engaging in mindfulness strategies, right? we very quickly derail, and then we become that behavior analyst who tells people to do I do, not as I am, or do as I say, not as I do, right? So instead, what I like to do is I start at the same again, have a cup of coffee, do Wordle, a little mind exercise. Then I immediately move my body in some way. If I have the time, I take my dog for a walk. If I don't, I simply just do some mild stretches. Nothing extensive. I'm not doing kettlebells at 5 a.m., right? That's just, it's not what's happening. But I wake up around the same time every day, sometime between 5:30 and 6 every morning. Even on the weekends, I usually only give it like an extra 30 minutes, like 6:30 to 7, right? Because that routine's important for me. And if my kids are waking me up, I'm already set for reactivity as opposed to setting myself up for this type of success, right? Then I usually talk to my husband for a little bit. I nurture the relationship that's with me, right? And I might reach out to some loved ones and friends, check in with them for their days, foster those relationships. My friends are scattered throughout the whole country, so I like to check in with them. That's valuable to me, right? And then I'm going to check in on my schedule. What do I really need to do today? Dang it. Now I'm going to be engaging in some mindfulness exercises because that was not what I wanted to do today. And I kind of forgot that I had it scheduled. Crap. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to make it work, right? Because I've had enough sleep. I've already exercised a little bit. I've already nurtured some of my relationships. Oh my gosh, though, what have I not done? I haven't eaten anything. I've only had black coffee. Crap. So maybe I'm going to stop for just a second and be like, okay, before I rework my schedule, I need to have a snack. I need to eat some protein, right? So that I can get myself moving. So I'm going to fix myself some peanut butter toast or something like that, right? Probably while I'm reworking my schedule, in all honesty. That's okay. Still taking care of myself, still taking care of a buffer, right? And I've already met some of those buffers just because of my routine. But notice, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to modify my routine here for a second because I'm reworking my schedule. But I've already started it with a little baby routine that if I need to, I can go back to. And so this is what I like to do with our learners. I like to have them essentially start with some sort of physical activity, some sort of activity that they need to go through, where we might also practice mindfulness strategies. I might then end with a snack that's scheduled. And I'll say, okay, 1, 2, 3, right? We love first, next, then schedules. First, we're going to stretch, or you've got PT. I'm going to write PT. We often co-treat with PT. So first you've got PT. I know that's not your favorite thing, but it's only 15 minutes long today. So that's awesome. So 15 minutes of PT. Sweet. After you've got PT, why don't we do we'll finish up our art project together, right? So we've got an art project that we're going to be working on. I'm going to embed some of our ACT activities and metaphors into it. I might make a mistake so that I can model what it looks like to work through a mistake, right? It might be frustrating to get the glue cap off. And so we might have another opportunity for mindfulness there, right? So embedding these types of activities or these types of ideas too throughout these routines. And notice I'm not going to put on there in mindfulness strategies. I'm just saying we're doing our art project, right? And then we're going to eat a snack. Cool. Are you ready for that, dude? Awesome. Let's do it. You can do the same thing for yourself. I'm going to see this learner, then I'm going to go for a walk, and then I'm going to eat some lunch. What? Who are you? But you know what? That walk and lunch really only added 30 minutes to your day. You can go for a 15 to 20-minute walk. I promise you can, right? Definitely. You can leave a learner's house and instead of going straight to the next learner's house, stop and get yourself a snack. I swear you have enough time. Promise. Do you know why I know that you have enough time? Nobody's going anywhere. Even if you're late, they're still not going anywhere. It's okay. I promise. We get so worried about being late, and it's okay. We have so much anxiety about being late. But what that ends up doing is taking away a lot of the stuff that we need, right? So suddenly we're not able to practice mindfulness strategies because we're so focused on being late. And now we're snapping at everybody because suddenly it's everybody's fault that we're late. We're pissed at the cars in front of us because how dare they be going the actual speed limit and not at least 7 miles over the speed limit? Because don't they see that we're late? Oh my gosh, did I just get stuck behind another red light? Now I'm mad. Cool. Now you're gonna walk into a session. Really good. Whoa, 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 whoa. Be a buffer. Don't walk in hot. Walk in modeling mindfulness. Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I realized I hadn't eaten today. And I needed to grab something. I don't know of a single parent that would tell you that you shouldn't do that. In fact, that might be a prompt to them to be like, oh my God, I haven't eaten yet today either. I should probably do that. It happens. I say this as a parent who ate their first meal at 2 p.m. It's one of those things. It's one of those buffers that I'm working on. But inevitably, we find this on the other side, the barriers. This happens. It happens to ourselves too. We might not have access or availability to a therapist. We might not be able to afford it. In our families, it might be really kind of shunned to see a therapist. These are things that happen. These are things that come up. These are things that come up with the families that we talk with too, right? So we can also look at these barriers, these challenges, and we can meet them head on, right? We don't have to avoid them. We don't have to swerve around them. We can continue to provide resources. We can continue to provide modeling strategies of how to do this. We're not causing harm. We're not treating trauma. We're embedding routines throughout the sessions to make this happen for them. ACT provides that mindfulness strategy for us, right? The rest of these are truly committed actions if you want to get down to it. Regular exercise is a committed action. It can also be a present moment activity. I love doing nature walks with kids. Regular exercise that's also embedded within the present moment, which is mindfulness, right? Okay. Again, y'all, she's got great stuff. This is the article that it all comes from. I believe you've all been given this copy where you access the CEU. But as always, when I send out the recording, you'll also get um, these resources. Beautiful. Any questions so far as we get into our last little bit? Sweet. Thanks, y'all. Okay. So how can I be a buffer? Well, we've talked about this quite a bit, right? This really comes down to a lot of modeling. So we're practicing ACT ourselves. Okay, I can do this because I'm going to be helping other families do this too. This is in alignment with my values. I can make this choice that's kind of difficult and kind of hard because it's in alignment with my values. This is alignment within your community values, right? The shared value of learning. So you're already practicing these types of skills, right? I say this literally every single time that we get together because it is a shared value. You can also engage in mindfulness exercises. This is something that I love with present moment. So, mindfulness supports 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the grounding exercise that we did at the very beginning. So simple, right? It's not formulaic, right? It's not strict. It can literally just be, hey, what do you see right now? Fantastic. Do you feel something weird in your body? Let's wiggle that out. Cool. Can we get started again? Awesome. Let's do it. Right? Now we've got this committed action skill, but how are we going to reach it? We're going to go through some choice making. We're going to solve some problems, right? That is part of values-based committed action, right? Just what we were talking about before. I can choose to stay really hooked. I can choose to do something that's unsafe. I can choose to avoid this problem head on. Or I can present two different values-based actions for us to engage in instead. And then again, what we were talking about earlier with diffusion, model it. Model those immediate coping skills. When we talk about trauma survivors, and I'm going to be real, I know many of us as behavior analysts are trauma survivors. Immediate coping skills is hard. So we've got to practice and model immediate coping skills. Because again, that's providing that space between the stimulus, the thing that we don't want, and our reactivity. And instead of making it reactive, making it responsive, right? We've added that pause between with diffusion. Now I'm going to be able to accept that all of these challenges kind of happen, and I'm not going to be able to control them. Adverse events happen and have happened, and I don't have to dwell on them, but I can move forward, right? And then when I'm practicing this myself, I can recognize that this person's story is different than mine. Their perspective today is going to be different than my perspective today. So I definitely need to be aware of that, especially when I'm talking about caregivers and what they might be going through and recommendations that I might be making for them. Maybe instead of recommending that they start with a manding procedure, maybe instead I check in on the buffers. One of the things that we love to do at our agency is when we're embedding these types of routines is when we notice what's going on with with our families, how we can address that from an ACT perspective, as from a buffer, trauma-informed perspective. One of the things that many people deal with is sleep disturbances. So we've had one caregiver in the past who was like, I'm not sleeping at night. Like I legitimately am not. And nap time is haphazard at best, and we knew it because we'd been there when it was supposed to have been nap time. And I was like, all right, so let's do this instead. Let's end your sessions 30 minutes earlier. And the last 30 minutes of your session, we're going to set in a sleep hygiene schedule so that essentially when we leave, everybody's ready to be down for a nap. And that worked for a long time until another problem arose. And this also happens with trauma survivors. Things will work for a while, and then a barrier will come up, right? The excuse will come up, the shift will happen, and you'll find that you're no longer, this caregiver is no longer doing the same routine, right? They varied from the routine. Now they're back to the reactivity state. It's okay. ACT is a practice. That's why it's a buffer, right? It's there for you when you need to come back to it. And for us, we know that we always need to come back to it. It's just part of our daily living, right? But for many caregivers, this is a hard thing for them to practice. They're not used to caring for themselves. And so when we give them this free time of like, hey, you now have nap time, they're like, what? So they might sabotage it. That's a trauma response. That's not in our scope to address. We don't need to tell them, I'm pretty sure that's a trauma response and that you're sabotaging your own behavior and routine. No, nope, nope, nope. Instead, I think maybe we need to adjust the routine again. Let's get back to assessment, right? Let's reassess, let's reevaluate what we need to do. That's how we can implement ACT with our caregivers as well as with ourselves, right? While recognizing that this is a practice and trauma informed. So, this is something that I wrote not too long ago, but it is really important. Why do we need routines? We often hear the excuse, the barrier, that they're too rigid or they're too inflexible or that they're not real life. Real life doesn't follow a routine, right? And they're right. Real life often presents us a lot of stimuli that we don't want to deal with, and we start reacting to them. But when we have an established routine, we're no longer waiting for the stimuli to come to us, right? We're creating, we're enriching, we're providing the engagement. And then if we need to veer from that routine, we can because we have a routine to go back to instead of wandering aimlessly, waiting for experiences to happen to us, right? So, again, when I talk about establishing healthy routines, start with the buffers. And when you're working with learners, most of our learners, when we take this assumed approach, have experienced trauma. So, start with the buffers, start with a snack, start with physical activity, start with teaching them how to engage in their community. For yourself, reach out to a friend while you're eating a snack, right? Meet them for lunch, meet them for coffee. Cool. It doesn't have to be an extensive to-do list. You don't have to constantly be checking things off, right? It doesn't have to be a token economy. It can be a first, next, then. It can be something for yourself as simple as that, too. On the days that I don't have work, and let's say for some weird reason we don't have some sort of activity for the kids, I still do a very simple routine, very much the same way. I wake up, I have my coffee, I do my Wordle, I go for a walk, I eat breakfast, and then I garden because it's something that I enjoy doing. Check in with the kids. I might play with them for a little while. Might do an activity like getting our nails done or doing our nails together, braiding hair for my son, taking him to batting practice, right? And then that might lead into the afternoon where I might go for another walk or paint. I just have to embed these types of activities through my day so that I'm not just wandering aimlessly. Because as a trauma survivor myself, it can be a slippery slope of maladaptive behaviors. Free time can become unsafe for many trauma survivors. This is why a lot of times school settings are really uncomfortable for trauma survivors. As much as teachers don't want to admit it, there's a lot of downtime in schools and classrooms. That downtime, they don't know what to do with. We don't know what to do with, right? So we've got to teach these types of leisure skills. You can doodle, you can talk to a friend, you can nurture these relationships. You can have a snack right now, right? You can build in a buffer during this downtime. Okay, cool. This next article, I'm not going to go through mostly because it's actually not behavior analytic, but I do really like it. It also talks about establishing routines after trauma. This is also great for caregivers or for us to read, to relate to caregivers essentially as well. Um, Again, recognizing that we are not play therapists. We are not therapists designed to treat or work with trauma. But we also do need to recognize that if we're dealing with trauma survivors, we should be recommending that holistic approach, that they are also receiving services to help address that as well. Perfect. Oh, but you will get access to this article as well. And this is just an example of what your daily routine could look like. Again, something super simple, first, next, then, or this could be what you do every day. This could be how you start your day, just for yourself. So again, you might go for a walk, come back, have some toast, eggs, do something for you that you like to do, like painting or hanging out with a loved one. I always like to add something that's going to help keep you clean, right? Help with that household management. Maybe it's just hanging your clothes up off of your chair. And I say that assuming that everybody has this chair in their own bedrooms that also collects clothing, or is it just me? Surely not. But if it is, that's what I do, is I'm like, all right, if there's nothing else that I know that I can do, thanks for that validation. If there's nothing else, I will pick the clothes up off of the chair and hang them up. That takes 10 minutes or sometimes less, but I always like to tell myself that it takes longer. And then I might call my mom. And then I might also have a snack. So this again is just an example of how you can set a daily routine for yourself, especially if you're struggling with structure. And then you can have your learners mimic the same type of routine or schedule. Cool. So again, I'm going to provide all of those resources to you, all of those articles. You will have them in the with recording. And next month, we might have to change the time. So I'll keep everybody posted about that one. But we're really going to be focusing on coping skills, mostly because I get that that's a problem for all of us. So, all right, y'all. Well, I hope to see everybody again next month. I hope this was helpful. If you are looking for CEUs for today, remember to email them at, or email your BCBA number to ace@acrossenvironments.com with at least one takeaway from today's session. And then again, if you're doing the recording, same thing applies. Email ace@acrossenvironments.com your takeaway. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.